Hello, welcome to Farmgate. I'm FFINLO COSTAIN, editor of 8.9.com. Autumn has come, apples are plenty, blackberries are ripe, and the smell of crumble has been filling my kitchen this weekend. So too, the festival season is changing colour, soon to fall and lie dormant. But before we get there, we have one last splendid regenerative gathering to harvest, and this is our essential guide to the Agroforestry Show, which takes place at Woodoaks Farm in Hertfordshire on the 10th and 11th of September. I'm joined by Ben Raskin from the Soil Association, by Caroline Harrison, Technical Policy Manager at the Institute for Chartered Foresters, by Tom Kemp, the Director of Working Woodlands Cornwall CIC, and by JOHN PAWSEY from Shimpling Park Farm. Welcome all. Ben, you're the co-organiser of the Agroforestry Show, which is, of course, a joint event of the Soil Association and the Woodland Trust. Tell us more. What's happening? Why is the event important?
Hi, Finlo. Yeah, so this is our second show. The first one, our successful debut a couple of years ago. It's really amazing, actually, how much has changed, even in those last 2 years. Demand for support for agroforestry, certainly for us, has gone through the roof. I think people are starting to cotton on to the potential benefits of agroforestry, but there are definitely still some barriers. There's uncertainty around funding and a lot of variation between the different nations. There's still also a lack of confidence, I would say. As farmers, we have forgotten how to look after trees and manage trees and use trees. And so when we start to think about bringing that back into our farming systems, I think a lot of farmers are still not sure about, what to plant, about how to manage trees. And so that's really what this show is about. We're going to be bringing together farmers, foresters, agroforesters, researchers, policymakers, the whole caboodle, bring together to share ideas, share knowledge, share inspiration, and hopefully come away more knowledgeable and more confident.
That's brilliant. Now, you mentioned the UK nations there, and of course, this show is in England. It's actually bisected by the M25 motorway, I think, and of course, the UK is made up of 4 nations. Will the other nations, apart from England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, are they going to be represented as well at the show?
We do. We have representatives from all the nations, and we've also been really keen to make sure that all the types of agroforestry are represented and types of farming are represented. So we've got upland sessions, we've got lowland sessions, we've got fruit, we've got nuts, we've got sheep, we've got cattle. Pretty much everything as far as we can is covered. And there's also, as well as all the nations in the UK, we've got more content from international speakers. We've got the Reforest European Project as one of our main sponsors with us, with a whole separate training technical hub, and also a session on international inspiration as well.
Now, I mentioned that the event is a sort of partnership between the Soil Association and the Woodland Trust. How did that come about?
We started working specifically on this around 10 years ago, I think, when we had our first agroforestry conference along with the Royal Forestry Society. And there's so much complementarity between the two organisations and really no competition in this space. They bring a lot of that tree expertise and we came from the farming side. And it just seems to work really well alongside the other stuff we do on agroforestry.
And do you feel that attitudes have changed over the course of those 10 years towards agroforestry? Do you think that people's knowledge and understanding, if you spoke to the average farmer in the street or in the field, do you think that they'd know what you were talking about when you mentioned the word agroforestry?
I think 10 years ago, no. We spent a lot of time talking about what it was and why it was good. I think, and I have to be careful because I'm aware that I tend to speak mostly to the sort of more environmentally regenerative type farmers. And so I have to be careful that I'm not in a little bubble thinking that everybody thinks the same way as I do. But I would certainly say it's within the farming circles that I move in, it's seen as more normal and more accepted. And the conversations now are not, what is it and why should I do it? It's more about, okay, well, what should I do and how should I arrange it? And what trees should I plant? And I've got this system, how will it benefit that system? So it's become probably more technical and more complex. And I think in a way that's part of the challenge is, it's not enough just to stand up and go, yeah, agroforestry is great. Farmers want to know, well, how does it work for my system? And what are the economics? And how am I going to make this pay? And I've got to invest a lot of money in this. Why should I? And so some of that is what we're hoping to tackle at the show.
I'm interested because you said that it had become more normal, more accepted, which almost makes it sound like it's been considered in a bit of a sort of pejorative fashion over the course of the last few years. Do you think it's become more desirable for more farmers over the course of that time?
I don't know if desirable is necessarily the right word, but I do think that climate change has really sharpened the focus. And one of the things we know that trees can do is to help buffer against some of those extremes of climate change. And even before this awful summer that we've had, a lot of farmers were thinking, how can I build resilience into my farming system? And I suspect after this summer that will be even more in the front of farmers' minds. So I think, yeah, desirable, I don't know, possibly essential is how I would describe it.
And Caroline, if I can come to you, what's special about the Agroforestry Show from your perspective?
It's great to hear Ben saying that, we struggled in the past with the definition of agroforestry. What is agroforestry? And just to hear him say that so in the farming communities that he moves within, it's more acceptable. It's fantastic. I went to the first show. It was an embryonic show. It may be an embryonic groundswell, but what I saw there was passionate people. There were professionals, policymakers, practitioners, all come together in a field. And the inquisitive, the enthusiastic, I think it's a melting pot of interesting people, certainly.
And you're from the Institute of Chartered Foresters. What's the role of the Institute of Chartered Foresters, in relation to this subject?
The ICF spans a supply chain, if you want to call it that. So we are the Royal Chartered, we have the Royal Charter of Forestry and Arboricultural. We are the only organisation that beholds that Royal Charter. So we set the professional standards for not just forestry, but for arboriculture as well. We also have CIEEM, so ecological chartered status, and we're not just forestry. We also work within the urban sphere as well, and the community sphere. So seeing that agroforestry is going beyond farming, beyond forestry is fantastic.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because the way that different words are used conjure different things for different people. So agroforestry, of course, is trees on farms. Forestry, for me, sort of raises two different images. One is the image of the medieval hunting forest, with lots of big oaks and that sort of thing. And then the other sort of more recent picture, I suppose, of forestry is that it's plantations. Do you span the whole works, or are you sort of more focused on plantation, on timber type trees, or what?
We span the whole gambit. We represent, we influence, we're in the policy sphere of everything trees and treescape. So whether that be production for timber, whether that be amenity, whether that be veteran parkland, whether that be urban forestry, the whole thing from nurseries all the way through to design as well and the built environment. So it's so interesting.
And presumably, within the work that you're doing, because, if we're talking about a crop, although farmers talk about the fact that they work on long time frames, it takes 3 years, to bring a beef cow from inception to market. It's a lot longer for trees again, isn't it? So you need to have your finger on the pulse, I suppose, in terms of what those future markets are 10 or 20 years down the line, whether that be for timber. And of course, we import 80% of the timber that we're using currently, let alone the future in the UK, whether it's for nature or nature credits or biodiversity net gain or amenity and well-being and things like that, as you say.
I think for me, it's how we normalise forestry, trees into the farming landscape, how we normalise forestry and farming, because forestry trees can contribute to the bottom line of the farm. Farmers should be using their own fencing materials. It's not just firewood. There's so much more that a tree can deliver, not just in a product form as well, but for the societal and the health benefits, not just for people and for animals as well. So agroforestry per se, is the definition right? I don't know, but trees on farms, there's so many different sort of nomenclatures you can throw around. But for me, for farmers, realizing that trees can deliver so much more for them is essential.
Now, Tom, Hertfordshire, where the show's taking place, is a very long way from Cornwall. So what makes the Agroforestry Show worth the effort for you to get there?
Yeah, it's a long way. Cornwall's quite a long way from most places, but yeah, I mean, as we talked about already, agroforestry one is seeing sort of a massive rise in people's consciousness, and the demand for agroforestry, even just in Cornwall, I've seen over the last few years has really rocketed, and yet most agroforestry projects are sort of in that embryonic stage. In the UK, we don't have very many long-term examples of agroforestry. So to actually sort of pick people's brains, talk to people about the different systems they're using, how it works on the ground, it's quite difficult. And the first show was fantastic for networking and for talking to people who are sort of really doing it and really getting their teeth into their own particular systems. And I would say every single sort of agroforestry project, every single farmer using trees does it differently. So the reason why I suppose the definition is broad is because every single person has a different definition and uses trees slightly differently to achieve different aims. So yeah, it's just really to get hold of this fantastic range of knowledge and experience from in a subject that is hard to do that.
And your organisation is called Working Woodlands Cornwall. And I just wonder if you could talk me through some of the ways in which woodland works, how it works for you, how it can work for other people.
Good question. Yeah. So we as a business cover quite a span of different woodland scenarios. So we offer sort of standard woodland management planning and forest planning. We also do agroforestry plans and work quite closely with organisations like the Woodland Trust to help deliver their sort of variety of trees on farms and agroforestry specific grants. But we also manage a woodland that's owned by Cornwall Wildlife Trust. So we're delivering the habitat works, and in exchange we get the wood which we turn into products. So today I've been delivering firewood. We also make charcoal and a few other sawn products. But really, yeah, for us, it's also about, we sort of struggle to do the consultancy if we don't do it ourselves. So I also have 8 acres where I've got a pig tree system ongoing, which yeah, it's a bit of a bad habit wanting to do the things that you consult on, because you end up doing quite a lot of things and being slightly too busy. But yeah, it's trees are sort of such a broad area and can deliver so many benefits. Getting them to work for you can happen in loads of different ways, and some of them can be really tangible, some of them might not be so obvious, but they really can sort of help farming's under a lot of pressure, and trees is definitely a tool in the toolbox that can really help with that pressure.
Now, Tom, you've got a session at 12 noon on day one called Finding Common Ground Between Farming and Forestry. What is that common ground? What are you going to be talking about?
Yeah, I mean, with sort of farmers and foresters in the last sort of 100 years have been quite separate, really, increasingly because both areas have become more technical and more machinery led. The skills gap is sort of relatively wide, I would say, and that knowledge gap, as we've alluded to, sort of farmers have essentially forgotten how to use trees to a large extent, and your average forester isn't hugely immersed in farming, but understands trees really well. So yeah, me and Rich Thomas, a farmer who does mostly silvopasture, will be looking at the different ways in which him and I think about agroforestry and think about trees, and hopefully trying to pull apart the sort of questions that a farmer might have for a forester, and equally the questions that a forester might have for a farmer.
And of course, trees are really important in terms of not just climate mitigation, but adaptation as well, about creating that resilience in the land. Are you able to just to give me one or two examples of the ways that trees can help with that adaptation and resilience?
Yeah, so we have quite a few examples in Cornwall. It's really windy here, and really exposed. So my pigs are sort of on quite a windy field. They're sort of one field away from the sea, essentially, and so when it's really sunny, they're suffering from the heat, and I have to get loads of water up there. When it's windy and wet, they're suffering from that, and it basically reduces the efficiency of the animal, if you want to look at it in that sort of way. And so my feed bill will go up. So there's a real tangible link between sort of how much shelter they're getting, and how much I'm spending on food. And another example in sheep, especially, is that certain minerals. I think I might be saying that copper's quite a key one. Is quite low in our soils in Cornwall. However, willow is a really cracking supplier of these key minerals, and essentially it means you don't have to go and buy it in a bag. You can have it growing, providing these multiple benefits, but it also delivers in some specific areas as well.
And just very quickly, in a couple of words, you were saying that your pigs are one field back from the sea. Clearly, there's lots of salt coming in there, lots of wind coming in. My background's on the Isle of Man. What kind of trees are you getting to grow along your hedgerow there?
Yeah, it's a good question. Species choice in sort of windy environments is always slightly tricky. And I've been lucky in that my project was fully funded, so I could kind of go for it and not worry too much. But the sort of examples of trees that I've definitely include things like willow, include hawthorn, include elm, and there is sycamore in there as well. They're pretty robust species. And from a resilience point of view, we look at this in forestry and agroforestry, really, is sort of not overly focusing on one particular species, making sure all your eggs aren't in the same species basket, just because we don't really know what the climate is going to do. There's going to be some change, but we can't exactly pin down what that will be. And so making sure that you spread your bets and you plant a suite of species that you know will grow now, but hopefully will grow in 100 years too.
Thanks, Tom. Now, John, you've been a feature. It makes you sound like a fountain or a statue or something. But anyway, you've been there at so many of the 2025 summer gatherings. Just, first of all, what have you come away with from those gatherings this year?
I think it's it's been quite an interesting year in many respects. One, because of course, in my whole, my last, this is my 40th harvest, and over the last 40 years, in 23 and 24, I've never had the choice that we've had of all these different options under the Sustainable Farming Incentive, the 23 offer and the 24 offer, and the closure of that, I think, has had quite a big impact on farmers, because the issue has been is that the price has been low, but also we've had two very difficult harvests, and in a funny kind of way, the fun has gone out of farming. And I'm not saying that it's going to return, but people are wondering in which direction they're going to be going in. And this is why I think, and this is why I am really looking forward to the Agroforestry Show, because, one of the saviors, as far as I'm concerned, in the farming calendar has been groundswell. And annoyingly, I didn't go to the first groundswell, and I didn't go to the first Agroforestry Show. So I'm just Johnny come lately, slightly on these things, but going to groundswell, even when things are looking a bit sort of, all doom and gloom, you're just meeting people who are thinking differently and sharing knowledge and sharing your woes, and of course having a lovely pint of beer in the evening. And especially if you're camping, you've got all that time to just carry on that conversation. So as soon as the invitation came out for the Agroforestry Show, I immediately booked on the day that it came out, and also a camping pass for all the days. And so I'm just looking forward to being with like-minded people. The thing about agroforestry, and I think, all the other speakers are completely right, is that, over the last sort of, when I first started going to see Martin Wolf at Wakelands, 25 years ago, it was a difficult subject to get across to people because it looks so weird. But then, of course, as Martin's site developed, we could see the joy in the whole thing. So we've been very lucky, because I'm very near to Martin, to have him so close. But I think that people are sort of looking for answers for different things, and everyone else has come up for the reasons why we should be considering it. And just being in a festival, and I'm going to call it a festival because that's what it'll be, is when you're with all those people, it just brings new vigor and positiveness to brings the joy back into farming.
Now, John, you alluded to this earlier on, but there are two sort of parallel conversations that are taking place in farming at the moment. I think one of them is the doom and gloom that you talked about. There are an awful lot of challenges, climate change, of course, being one, government policy being another, and many things in between. But yet at the same time, and this is perhaps the groundswell sort of aspect, I hear so many farmers saying this is frankly one of the most exciting times to be in farming as well. Would you agree with that?
Oh, well, listen, look, I've loved my farming life. Absolutely. I'm just saying at the moment, I think that because of this sort of, all these things coming together as in poor prices and the loss of these schemes that actually people have really wanted to engage with. If you think about the uptake, it's been massive. I mean, whether or not they dealt with it, properly is another question. But I just think, people are just sort of wondering which direction they're going to go in. But actually, in a funny kind of way, it makes them much more receptive to things like agroforestry. It makes them much more open-minded, because they're thinking, actually, I'm going to listen to that now, because the piece of what I've been listening to tell me to do X. Actually, the people who are doing Y, actually, that looks like a better bet. So I think, I think this show especially could be pushing more of an open door.
Now, John, I have to make a confession before I ask you the next question, which is that, we all had this conversation, a lovely conversation about this yesterday, when all you panel people came along and gave me some fantastic answers to some wonderful questions that nobody will ever hear because some gremlins got into my brain and the record buttons weren't pressed. But yesterday, and to be clear, I have flagellated regularly between yesterday and today to punish myself for that particular error. And thank you all for being here again. Yesterday you talked about alcohol, and you talked about you mentioned beer just now, but yesterday you talked about the value of alcohol and the importance of being able to sort of get together, with slightly loosened tongues in order to be able to sort of talk through the issues.
Of course, and I felt that yesterday's session probably descended into some depths that none of us wanted to descend into, but I loved it. But no, absolutely. I mean, it's also food as well. It's alcohol and food, and actually just sharing, those wonderful things that we have in life are so important, and it just relaxes people. It's something we all enjoy, and that's why I think with these events this the camping thing, and the place is staying open. It doesn't happen at the cereals event or any other event that we've had in the past, but this new generation of shows where it's much more about a sort of a sharing atmosphere is so important, that I'm just delighted that the Agroforestry Show is doing more of that, because we need more of those events in our diary.
Fantastic. Now, Caroline, you're on a panel for the Farmers Weekly Question Time, which is on day one at 11:30. What do you expect to be the big issues that are going to be coming up this year on that panel?
Well, just coming also back to John's point there, about alcohol and getting together in a field. I think with the mental health issues we have, because we haven't addressed that within both of our industries, whether that be forestry farming, I think just getting together and over a pint and having a good old chat is just so important. And just be honest and talk with one another. But the panel, so forestry is also probably at a cusp of some of the most exciting times we've had within the industry. I will be sort of majoring on where and how do we create agroforestry? Where's the professional advice going to come from to do that? How do we continue to break down those barriers between farming and forestry, production and conservation, all those sort of dichotomies that still exist? How do we continue to produce food and also have trees on farms? How do we address the climate, the biodiversity, and also, I would say, the timber and materials crisis that we have? I mean, Finn, like you alluded before to timber markets. By 2050, we're going to triple the worldwide demand for timber. And where's that going to come from? We absolutely need to be more self-sufficient, and that can come from agroforestry in whatever form that takes. Um, and we should be able to add those products that come from agroforestry to the bottom line of a farm. And I use the term normalise quite a lot, but we should be able to do that and see all types of trees and forestry within the landscape, whether that be plantation, whether that be eucalyptus, whether that be fast growing species, whatever. We should have a sort of a land use framework, should we call it, for trees within the landscape. That's where I'll be coming from.
I'm interested in the way that you talk there about the way in which the requirement for timber is going to triple, possibly even more than triple. But certainly, there are 3 times the number of trees that we're going to need in order to be able to do all the things that we want them to do, from timber framed houses to creating the shelter belts that Tom was talking about. But Tom was also talking about the importance of a diversification and not having all of your eggs in one, all of your acorns in one sort of tree species basket. And of course, lots of disease coming in from the south, whether that's beetles or fungus. Presumably diversity is going to play a really important role in all kinds of forestry going forward.
Absolutely. And I can plug the ICF's events. We had a series of webinars on horizon scanning. There's a really interesting paper come up. Resilience, adaptation, probably the top issue at the moment for both industries, I would say. Ips typographus, the 8-toothed bark beetle, wreaking havoc in Europe, or come over to this country as well. The pests and diseases are rampant. But I would say, a plug for forest research and our colleagues that work within plant health and animal health as well do a fantastic job. But absolutely, you can't have all your eggs in one basket. That would be an unwise thing to do going forward, I would say.
Yeah. Now, John, you're also on that same Farmers Weekly Question Time panel. What sort of issues are you expecting to come up from the audience?
Well, I would think, because, we planted our agroforestry in 2020, which actually was, when we planted it, if you ever listen to the Archers, they'd literally just planted theirs. So when everybody comes out of the farm and says, oh yeah, you planted yours with the Archers. No, I didn't. I planted them because I love Martin Wolf. Nothing to do with the Archers. It's so annoying. So I would think it would be more along the lines of, how wide your alley is going to be, the sort of practical questions: what species are you going to plant? What about drainage? What are you going to, what is your end market? And so I think those practical questions, agroforestry is one of those things that's a little bit like organic farming. When you first start considering a real change in something, first of all, you can think of all the reasons why you shouldn't do it. Because actually, when you're starting to talk to your neighbors, they will tell you all those reasons. You've just got to find a visionary. In the organic farming world, my mentor was a guy called Ben Pole, who farmed just down the road from me. He told me all the reasons why organic farming was completely possible. And Martin Wolf was my agroforestry guru. So I think it's, I think that's our role really, is we are giving people permission and the confidence to do something different. And I don't think, having planted our own agroforestry, even though I definitely didn't get everything right, I don't regret a single one of those poor decisions, because actually I've learned so much from them. So I think I'm going to hopefully I'll be able to answer the practical questions at a farm level. What are you thinking about? How do you get over those problems? And that's where I think I'll be best placed.
In Wales, over the last couple of years, we've heard quite a lot of argument around the role of trees, and government has been trying to insist, of course, at early stages in their sustainable farming scheme, that there needed to be 10% of farmers given over to trees, which created quite a big backlash, not just against the Welsh government from Welsh farmers, but also towards trees themselves. Have you noticed that sort of conversation more broadly across the UK? Have farmers, been picking up on that conversation? They sounded more antagonistic towards trees, within your orbit.
I personally think it's a mistake to tell farmers to plant a certain percentage of their land up in anything, to be quite honest. I think there's much more subtle ways of doing things. I don't think that was handled particularly well. There's pros and cons, obviously, because sometimes you have to put limits on. I mean, I'm thinking about things like the Sustainable Farming Incentive, with some of those options with no limits at all, and people having had bad harvests, they literally put their whole farm down to a leguminous lay or a wild flower mix or whatever it might be. So no, I think it's a mistake. I think you've got to engage. You've got to and you've got to lead people gently down a path. There's a phrase, isn't there, about leading a horse to water and all that. So yes, maybe the Welsh need to learn a bit about that.
And I think, of course, the Welsh government, and actually Welsh farmers' organisations, would probably say that the Welsh government did learn as a result of that conversation. And certainly the Sustainable Farming Scheme seems to have come to a fairly agreeable conclusion at this point in time. But it is interesting always to hear about the fallout of these conversations, in other places around the UK. Now, Ben, you're going to be kicking things off in the opening plenary with the session at 10 o'clock on day one called Adapting Our Growing Systems for Climate Change. Can you give us a flavour of that? Because the ecological crisis is accelerating. There's little doubt that we're going to hit 2 degrees within the lifetimes of many of the people attending the show. So how do our growing systems become more resilient to ecological turbulence?
Well, we're really delighted that Martin Crawford is going to be leading that session. I get the pleasure of introducing him, and a bit like John, he wasn't able to make the first one, so we're really pleased that I think of him as the godfather of agroforestry in the UK. And he certainly has such a deep understanding of natural systems, trees, and the wider picture. So he's going to set the scene for the whole show, really, about the ecological importance of trees and all of the different ways that they can help build resilience against climate change. Because ultimately, I think that's the way we're going to survive.
It's always an interesting one when you call somebody the godfather of something. I'm kind of almost expecting that if in some way you disagree with him, you're going to wake up with the crown of an oak tree on your pillow. But I just wonder if you could talk me through some of the resilience around ecology there, and some of the, I asked Tom before to give me 1 or 2 examples, but I wonder if you can think of other examples in sort of more inland situations, I suppose, about how trees provide for that resilience to flooding, perhaps, or to, intense sunshine.
It is about the extremes, isn't it? And I have a horticultural background, so I'm sort of more, I guess, in tune sometimes to the cropping situations, and thinking about things like salad leaves, for instance, which are really vulnerable to wind. One really harsh storm can wipe out your entire crop and make it unsaleable. It might still be edible, but it's unsaleable. So if you can slow those winds down, and typically trees will slow them down significantly if you get the system right, you might save an entire crop, which could be many thousands of pounds. But equally, a lot of crops don't like being in full sun all day long. We think of a typical field of vegetables or even some arable crops as wanting full sun. Well, actually, if it's 40 degrees or 35 degrees, a lot of those plants are going to shut down. They're going to slow down. They're not going to grow. They're going to be stressed. Even before you see them being stressed, they will be stressed and not growing. So providing dappled shade for a lot of crops, if we're starting to get some of these longer, hotter summers, will be a real benefit as well, in the same way as Tom described for the animals. So.
Fantastic. Now, I want to move on to what's almost the most exciting part of the program, where you get to choose your selection of the various sessions that you want to recommend to other people who are listening at the moment. And Tom, We've all spent some time talking about your own panels. There's so much going on over the 2 days of the show. I wonder whether you could share with us some of your top tips for hot panels and which sessions you're most looking forward to. And don't worry, I know that you were saying that you didn't have your list with you. You can talk to the sessions, but I've got some of the details in front of me. So if you could start us off.
Yeah, I'm really excited by the demo area this year. And there's one session in particular that's on sort of protecting young trees with electric fencing. Any agroforester who's doing silver pasture will know that sort of protecting your trees from the livestock that you're wanting to use them with is always there are sort of constraints and getting those trees established in the face of those animals can be a challenge. And so yeah, anything that can help with that is great. And so I'm interested to see what this method can do.
And that's with Fred Farrelly at 11 a.m. In the demo area on day one. What's your next choice?
And on day two, I'm really interested in sort of wider context for agroforestry. So the international examples that we have, and there's a session on the sort of learning outcomes from international examples of agroforestry. Places in North America and Europe are just that bit further ahead with agroforestry, and they're doing it at slightly larger scales typically as well. So yeah, I'm really intrigued to hopefully come away with a few ideas from there.
And that session's What Can the UK Learn from International Agroforestry? It's with Ed Colbert, Elaine Springay and James Whitehead. That's day two at 11 o'clock. And you had a third choice as well, I think.
What was my third choice?
Agroforestry for Nature Recovery.
Oh, yeah.
And, which I just took while I'm speaking. It's the 11:30 on day one.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of work with conservation woodlands occasionally, and I'm really interested in the nature recovery outcomes from agroforestry. Mostly, sort of, I focus on the really tangible outcomes that will affect sort of day-to-day farming, but the people who have the money and the people we sort of need to sell agroforestry to, as well as the farmers, are people who are working in nature recovery, who sometimes have larger purse strings and budgets that they need to pass on, and hopefully convincing those guys that the outcomes that they want can also be achieved with agroforestry, I think is super key. And it's a really amazing opportunity to sort of sell agroforestry more widely.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess, part of that is about that landscape scale approach to nature recovery, isn't it? Where getting the finance in place and finding different ways of funneling that finance to different farmers who are delivering different outcomes on their farm becomes so important. And there you've got some of the work of groups like North Star Transition and Soil Association Exchange and Great Yellow and other groups like that. Thanks so much, Tom. Caroline, which panels are you looking forward to?
Well, firstly, I'd like to applaud the organisers on what looks like a superb spread over the 2 days. Unfortunately, I'm only there for 1 day, so no bear for me. But I'm going to step out of my comfort zone. I'm going to step away from the woody/timber/forestry sort of webinars, and I'm really interested in green finance. And how are we going to look at biodiversity net gain? How are we going to look at stacking of finance, both probably, and how are we going to deliver that? So that's really interesting to me. I don't know the time, but you do.
Yeah, well, I probably do. That means I need to put my glasses back on. There are a couple of BNG type sessions, and certainly one of them is at 4 o'clock on day one, and that's biodiversity net gain through trees on farms. And that was one that I was going to recommend myself as well, because I have, as a lot of regular listeners will know, an interest in biodiversity net gain and how we fill that funding gap between money money that's coming in for food and how we fund the transition, towards nature recovery and that sort of thing. One of the programs that we had at the start of the summer was how can we accelerate BNG delivery, and that was around seeing if it was possible to change the preference for on-site biodiversity net gain delivery to off-site. And if that happens, and this is something that's been recommended by David Hill, who was the former deputy chair of Natural England, and Rob Hindle from Rural Solutions, who have the ear of government, I think, on this, then we're likely to see a real acceleration in the amount of biodiversity net gain nature credits that have been delivered on farms around the country. And as you say, that financing, that stacking of natural capital around integrated with food systems is so important. And if people are coming to this podcast new, then do scroll back, because from January this year, we were running our Filling the Funding Gap series. That was 11 programs specifically focusing on different types of natural capital, from BNG to woodland to peatland, etc., looking at ways that can help farmers, that can be stacked with food production and help farmers to get more money into their farm businesses. So thank you for that, Caroline. Were there any others that you wanted to recommend?
Yes. How do we deliver agroforestry in the uplands? Being a proud Cumbrian, now living on the edge of Dartmoor, I'm absolutely intrigued as to how that is going to happen with conflicts over priority habitat and all that kind of thing. And then in international perspectives, which I'm going to miss on the second day, which I think will be hugely interesting.
And when you talk about those sort of challenges around the uplands, they sound like they're largely governance challenges rather than tree challenges. Of course, Scotland, has been reforesting the hillsides and the mountains, particularly in the Highlands.
I think both, actually. Certainly from a governance and land use perspective, yes, but also looking at eucalyptus trials that happened when we did have Newton Rig up in Cumbria. Just how that dynamic happens between uplands and lowlands. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. John, which panels are you going to be making a beeline for?
Well, I'm really hoping that I'm going to get up in time for the farm tour, which is at the beginning of day one, because as a farmer, we love to go and look at what other people are doing and giggle at the back of the class, and also be at the front learning stuff. So I'm really looking forward to that. That's day one. Also on day one, I've got an unhealthy love for walnuts. As far as I'm concerned, they're the king of nuts. They're just so lovely and tasty, and you can make a cake out of them as well, which is great. So I'm going to go to the session on walnuts, walnut availability, and there's on the end of day one and at the beginning of day two, there's another walnut session. Completely agree with Caroline. I am talking about building more resilience into farming businesses. I'd really like to understand more about nature recovery, BNG, carbon, how we can get into those markets to help us understand those markets, because I certainly don't understand them at the moment. We're currently in a big landscape recovery pilot looking at linking secondary and ancient woodlands across 20,000 hectares in East Anglia. So we really need to understand how we can deliver in terms of nature recovery, but also for some stacking as far as our farmers are concerned. Tom's already given a really good rundown about why trees are great for livestock, but I trust that Tom hasn't taught us everything, and there's a session on that, and so I'm going to go to that because I think that's incredibly important. So thank you for that, Tom. And the last one, if you ask an organic farmer what are your two major challenges, one is weeds and the other one is fertility. So the compost workshop is something that I'm going to hang on for at the end of day two.
Fantastic. And as you say, there are a couple of walnut sessions, specifically walnut sessions at the Agroforestry Show. One of them I've been able to find on the timetable. That's day 2 at 9 o'clock, Walnuts for Profitable Agroforestry. And I only found one, I think, because I went off on a flight of fancy once you started talking about walnuts, thinking, I quite fancy a walnut whip. And of course, when you think about a walnut whip, you've got the walnuts, which we can produce in the UK. You've got eggs and sugar, so egg white and sugar, which of course goes into that soft meringue in the middle. You got you got the chocolate as well. So I guess it's just the cocoa that we need to find a way of growing in the UK so that we can do the full walnut whip. Anyway,
literally no one after this session is going to be able to contain, so they're going to go straight down to the local garage and get a walnut whip.
I think that's it. Absolutely.
I am not going to be able to get through the evening without one now.
No, I think somebody's going to have to phone that local garage and make sure they've stocked up, aren't they? Now, Ben, slightly trickier for you as you've put the whole event together yourself, but which panels are you especially keen to be at and why?
You're trying to maybe choose a favourite child, aren't you here?
Yeah, well, go on, choose a favourite child. Which one is it?
Well, I'm going to start with a couple of evening sessions because I think sometimes you feel I've been to a whole day of things. Shall I go to the evening ones? So I'm going to plug. John can grab his beer before he goes to them, and they're designed to be sort of a little bit less sort of full on. And there's two. There's one. There's Andy Dibbin talking about silver horticulture, and he's such an engaging and knowledgeable speaker that it'll be a lot of fun, and you'll enjoy it as well as learning a lot. The other one is Wild City. And these are two garden designers that are working in London, but incorporating trees and agroforestry into their designs. And I was really pleased to hear Caroline talking about the breadth that they do as an organisation. And I think, understanding how the consumer and the public view agroforestry is really going to help support farmers to do it. So really getting that whole gamut right from farming through to the peri-urban into the urban, I think is going to be really interesting, and I'm really looking forward to hearing them.
Yeah, and of course, when you talk about the urban is a really important place for trees as well. We kind of tend to think of them more in terms of the countryside. But if we're thinking about urban trees, they have a huge impact on well-being, the presence of trees or not. And if you've got enough of the street trees and parks within a city, then it can make a really tangible sort of several degrees difference, can't it, on a hot day? Really important.
Yeah. And then on day 2, 11 a.m. in the morning, there's a session called Developing Markets. So again, if farmers are going to make trees work for them, they need to be able to make some money from the trees. Part of that might come from improvements to their the system and the farm, but equally, most trees will have something of value that you can sell from it. And it's only very recently, I would say, that people have started to think about marketing agroforestry as part of that story. And there's 3 speakers in the session. One is someone who owns a timber building company, and she's really interested in sourcing more timber and not just sort of green oak, which she uses, but things like biochar and wood chip and all of the different things that trees potentially could feed into the construction industry. And then there's a couple of other. One is a herbal tea company that is sourcing tree products, and it's called From Trees. So they're marketing their tea as agroforestry tea effectively. And then another one called Forest Cola. So Moody, who also runs a business called Forest Medicine. So again, he's bringing those trees into the marketing and really thinking about, because everybody loves trees, don't they? Mm-hmm. So if you can use it and prove and show with integrity that your farming system is doing that, then that's an extra marketing thing. But it is a little bit complicated. So I'm really interested in how you can make it work without it becoming sort of confusing and difficult for the consumer to understand what that means.
So when we're talking about supply chains there, we're not only talking about the supply chains in terms of where the wood goes and how that wood is used, but actually how it contributes to being able to sell other products from the farm as well, because you're telling the story about that nature recovery, about that integrated woodland on your farm.
I think so. And I think there are massive opportunities. John mentioned, and the nuts, we're growing quite a lot of nuts at Eastbrook. A lot of agroforestry farmers are putting nuts in because they're good, robust trees, and farmers understand a food product probably more than a timber product. So it's quite a good one to go to. But equally, there's billions of pounds worth of herb market, for instance, that we import. The construction industry, as we said, is desperate for materials. So there's huge business opportunities here that we're only just starting to understand and tap into.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm just going to mention another couple myself, I don't think that have come up yet. One is Trees for Livestock Health and Welfare, which is on day 2 at 11 o'clock. That's a farm walk, and I'm really interested in that, not least because, you know, farm animal health and welfare was one of the sort of roots that brought me into this particular world in the first place. But I'm interested in, you know, what sort of heights trees can be grown at for what different purpose, about tree fodder, trees for medicine, shade and shelter, those sorts of things. But which trees, or whether there are any no-nos within that, how you balance the benefit of additional tannins with the risk of over medicating and the risk of potential poisoning from things like oaks and beech and so on. So I'll be really interested in that. And then there's another session at the start, almost competing, I think, with your opening plenary and session there, Ben, where you've got your Adapting Our Growing Systems for Climate Change. Claire Whittle and Chris Harrop at 10 o'clock have got What Does Climate Resilient Farming Look Like in 2050? And it's going to be a toss-up between those two, because I think they both sound really fascinating. And again, trying to envision what the world of agriculture, what the world at all might look like in 2050 would be really interesting, and therefore how we can plan and prepare, create resilience for that. Now, Ben, I wonder if you could just wrap up for us, and thank you very much, everybody, for your choices of panels there. But when people leave, what do you hope that they're going to take away with them, you know, quite apart from their litter and their tents and things like that?
So what drives me in my work is I want farmers to think of trees every time they make a farming decision. Now, it might not be that trees are the answer, but I would love it if they go, I wonder if trees might help me in this crop or this animal or this, whatever it is I'm doing. So that we talked about that normalization and that bringing back together of trees and farming. So that's what drives me. So I'm hoping that at the end of the show, farmers will be more confident and more, I guess, more willing not to think of, oh, that's my agroforestry field and this is my farming field. Because even, you know, we're closer than we were, but it still feels a little bit as though, well, I'm doing my agroforestry bit here and I'm going to carry on with my other farming here. And obviously it is a transition. And some fields, you know, we don't want trees everywhere. Obviously, you know, there are ground nesting birds, there are, you know, special soils that we don't want trees on. So we're not necessarily going to have trees everywhere. But thinking about it as a possibility. So what I'd like is for farmers to go back and to think, oh, you know, what have I got? What have I got on my farm? How can I manage it better? What are the opportunities for improving it? Where can I plant it? Or if you're a forester thinking, actually, I haven't really considered that I could be doing this bit over here, or there might be, you know, links between farmers and foresters and business opportunities and things like that. So that's the main thing. I'd like some of them to be going and planting some more trees. That's part of it. I would really hope that if they haven't already, they fill in a PA4, because at the moment, one of the few funding still available is a bit of funding to plan your agroforestry. So obviously we all want to be planning anyway. Get a bit of money to do that is really helpful. And then the final thing I would like is for them to take away is a copy of the new agroforestry handbook, which we're launching at the show. So the second edition, the first one came out in 2019. So we're really excited to be launching the second edition, available at the show 1 month before its official launch. So that's another good reason for turning up.
Brilliant. And if you could just drop the name of that form again, presumably that's in England.
It is in England. It's the PA4. Yeah, the agroforestry plan.
Wonderful. Always good to be paid to plan. That's fantastic. And as you were saying, it's all about the right tree in the right place. But what the hope is that, you know, people will go away and consider how trees can be used, whether trees are appropriate, you know, in any of the decisions that they're taking on their farm. Oh, look, I'm really looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to meeting you or seeing you all again, you know, at the Agroforestry Show next week. But that's it. That is all we've got time for. I'd like to thank my guests, JOHN PAWSEY, John Kemp, Caroline Harrison and Ben Raskin. The Agroforestry Show is on the 10th and 11th of September at Woodoaks Farm in Hertfordshire. Farm Gate will be there. We're going to be recording impromptu podcast conversations in the field, just as we did at Groundswell, and then releasing them in the few days following, the week following the show. So please do look out for those on your Farm Gate feed in the week following the show. If you've enjoyed listening, please come back back and listen to more, tell your friends, like us, review us and share our links. Farmgate is now the highest ranking UK podcast for regen farming and food security. We're part of 8.9.com, the land use news channel, which is sponsored by First Milk, Pelican Ag, Rural Solutions, the Usk Catchment Partnership, Agrolo and individual donors. I've been FFINLO COSTAIN. Bye for now.